instruction you refer, that would be what, that would be mental anguish
Yes.
under the non-economic damages jury instruction. So can't you recover for that anyway? What does this give you, this post-accident conduct give you that you don't already have?
In comparison to the permanent brain injury, it doesn't, it's small, but it gives us additional damage that continues afterwards because...
And why can't you argue that damage anyway?
We can, and but it's, I mean, it seems like the defense wants to cut off all evidence because of the motion for summary judgment on negligent infliction of emotional distress, but that only says that claim is gone, which has a different standard than normal negligence.
Correct.
So we're arguing that standard negligence applies here for what happened after the crash. We also have the violation of the skiers code and the Summit County ordinance, the safety, which requires that the defendant stay on the scene to summon help, give out names. The evidence at trial shows that Terry Sanderson was knocked out and didn't know what happened, and Whitney Smith did not believe Craig Ramone saying, hey, it was Gwyneth Paltrow, and so what happened was he continued to be frightened even up until Whitney Smith took him down in the toboggan, and maybe at the ski first aid station, excuse me, Miss Whitney Smith, the patroller, took care of Terry, and Craig Ramone had said it so many times, finally it dawned on Terry that no, it wasn't me, and he could relax because of that ongoing negligence, delayed the treatment. Whitney Smith was not able to properly assess Terry and properly investigate this, properly do the things that a patroller would normally do if Miss Paltrow had hung around. So the damage is, I think it's, I'm not saying it's as big as the main injury, which is the brain injury. It's not, but the broken ribs were causing pain. Terry was frightful about what had just happened to him. He's waking up from unconsciousness. There's clear testimony to all of that. Craig Ramone says that. Terry Sanderson says that. Craig Ramone confirms it. Even Whitney Smith confirms the disorientation. And even on the log of the ski patrol, it says disorientation.
My question still, though, is I agree with all of that. My question still is, though, if I grant a directed verdict as to liability on these allegations of post-accident, failure to give name and address, failure to render aid, if I grant a directed verdict on those two things, why can't your client still recover for all of that fright, for all of that delay? I mean, isn't that something that you can still argue under?
Oh, yes, we definitely agree with you on that, Your Honor.
So what does it get? What does it give you? I guess this post accident acts for omissions.
I don't think it requires a special instruction. I think it's just the standard negligence. Just like, let's say there's a car crash, and the crash creates an injury. In addition, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this. This was filed at 9:30 last night. Sam Goldstein testified right there that this delay and denial and caused Terry to suffer additional psychological, as well as not neuropsychological, not brain damage, but psychological or psychiatric injury, where to this day, where Terry is upset, more than upset, but Sam Goldstein, the neuropsychologist, testified that this pattern has caused Terry to continue to suffer damages. It's not brain damage per se, but it's emotional or psychiatric or psychological trauma, not neuropsych. And Sam Goldstein, who's also a psychologist, testified to that, and that it's ongoing to this day. on this witness stand right here. And we don't want to compare it to the brain injury, but all combined, it's all those factors combined to support Terry's damage claim for negligence. And we just think that to artificially cut it off at the end of the impact, and when Ms. Paltrow bounces off Terry and slides off and Terry's face down, as the testimony of Craig Ramon confirms, that's not the end of the story. The story continues on and has affected Terry to this day, at least psychologically, and Sam Goldstein confirms that.
Let me get this straight about, so I understand the failure to render aid aspect. And are you relying on the ordinance for that?
Both the ordinance and the ski code, but it's not just the failure to render aid, it's also the... Okay, go ahead.
And then the second question is, failing to give name and address. How do you attach that to any damage?
Well, that's like in the car crash, and someone's dazed, concussion, and it may not be a hit and run. It may be something less. They stayed and they said, "Are you okay?" And if we assume they're correct, but they get up, and Craig Ramon says Gwyneth Paltrow didn't say anything. They just get up and then they drive away.
But the ordinance requires. Are you relying on the ordinance for the name and address thing too?
Both of them, but also just common sense. It could be a sidewalk.
What?
It could be a sidewalk, Your Honor.
Both of what? You're relying on both of them, you said? Both
the ski ordinance and the skier's code.
Does the skier code say that you need to give your name and address?
The skier's code, yes.
What's that exhibit, plaintiff's exhibit?
Well, it was testified to by Eric Christensen and I believe by Paul Bogger yesterday that there's a skier's code, and it's also testified to by, it's just kind of, it's standard like...
Mr. Sorensen, do you have the plaintiff's exhibit for that skier code?
Let me look, Your Honor. I don't have it right this minute. Just a second.
I can look for
Here it is. It's 37.
Here, faster than
It doesn't talk about giving your name and address if there's an impact. So the only evidence that I'm aware of for establishing that as possible evidence of negligence is the ordinance.
I think the ordinance, but also...
And the ordinance says that they're to give it to a Deer Valley employee, and she already had done that before she even started that day. The Deer Valley employees, the ski instructors knew who she was and had her contact information.
But the clear testimony is the ski instructor, Christensen, did not give her information.
But the ordinance doesn't require that.
The ordinance or the skier's code?
Either one. The ordinance says that they're to give it to a Deer Valley employee if there's an accident. Am I reading that right? I think that's Exhibit 38.
Plaintiff's exhibit, Your Honor.
Yeah, at the very end of the Summit County Reckless Skiing Ordinance, the last phrase. If it is necessary to secure aid for a person injured in the collision, the person securing such aid shall give his name and address as required herein after such aid is secured and before leaving the ski area.
Okay.
And that's 38.
And who's the person securing such aid? I think that's the person that reported it, right? Wouldn't that be Mr. Ramon?
It says any skier above the first part of that full sentence of Part C. Skier's duty to notify operator or employee in event of collision. Any skier involved in a collision with another skier or person in which injury results shall give his name and address to an employee of the ski area operator or a member of the ski patrol.
And that's my point. Didn't she do that? Isn't it undisputed that she gave that information to a ski area operator?
It wasn't on the incident report. When my client sought that information, it wasn't listed on. In fact, it was whited out on the the information he got, so he had no way to contact her, and he had to spend additional effort, psychological effort that was harmful to him, as per Dr. Goldstein. This continuous denial and obstruction added to his torment and damages. Now, you could say it's wrong, it's small, but Dr. Goldstein said it was significant enough that he reported on it and said Terry Sanderson was still suffering from it 5 years later.
You understand the argument now?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Owens, any follow-up?
Thanks, briefly. None of us wants to confuse the jury. They understand this is a negligence claim. But even I'm confused on this idea of she did something negligently after the fact. There's been no evidence, no expert testimony or otherwise that the delay caused any harm whatsoever.
What about Goldstein's testimony?
Testimony.
So Goldstein's testimony, as I recall, it was Eric Christensen's yelling, not Gwyneth Paltrow's not yelling. He described Mr. Sanderson observing and hearing a man screaming in his face, Eric Christensen. That's disputed by Mr. Christensen, but even if it's assuming it's to be true, that has nothing to do with Gwyneth Paltrow's personal information.
What about the argument that the difficulties encountered later in figuring out who this was and establishing, the correct information from the reporting caused additional, I guess, anguish on the part of Mr. Sanderson?
So Steve Graff, the Deer Valley head of operations, reported receiving 2 contacts from the patient, from Sanderson, and that he responded and relayed Gwyneth's proper
I
information.
realize that's your evidence, that's the defendant's evidence, but what about the plaintiff's evidence? Could the jury not make some conclusions based on that are reasonable?
So what do we know is by 6 hours he knew the person's name and actually thought it was cool. I'm famous. And I think the undisputed testimony is that the ski instructor told Ramon, your buddy just took out Gwyneth Paltrow. Now, if Sanderson's testimony is to be believed, he wasn't in his best state to receive an address or anything. It was appropriate to talk to his friend Craig Ramon's right there. That was Gwyneth Paltrow. You can Google Gwyneth Paltrow and get an address for her work. They had that together. Then they were texting on their meetup group, like Gwyneth Paltrow did this. So they had information right away. The mental distress and things, I think, as you said, they can talk about that, the aftermath, but not her actions. She didn't have negligent actions by, I think in all reports, Terry said, I'm okay.
What about Terry's testimony and Mr. Goldstein? I guess that's what I'm focusing on, their evidence.
Goldstein's...
Terry says that he was frightened by the fact that he was just left there.
Yes.
And Dr. Goldstein substantiates that and substantiates that it was a continuing concern.
Goldstein, and I took it all to mean Christensen. Terry looked up, he saw a Deer Valley person in a green outfit, and he said, oh good, there's someone here to help me. And then when the green Deer Valley guys skied away, which is contrary to Eric Christensen's testimony that he was the last on the scene, but let's presume Sanderson's testimony is correct. He felt abandoned. He didn't say, I felt abandoned that Gwyneth left. I don't remember that testimony. So I think they're conflating the two. It's probably a good thing that Gwyneth didn't stay. She was pretty mad. She got the all clear from Christensen. He's okay. They observed no unconsciousness, by the way. He's on his feet. Ski patrol people, everything okay? Everything's okay. And then you can leave. The abandonment came from the ski employee. And that was for, keep in mind, a few minutes. Because a few minutes later, downhill, I'm not okay. Okay, different story, but I'm not okay. Let's flag the patroller. Whitney's there, and he's... So we really are talking about a couple minutes. And it wasn't from the Gwyneth abandonment. It was from the ski patroller. He felt like the ski patroller had bullied him and had abandoned him. He never said, I felt hurt and abandoned and frustrated that the skier, whose name they now knew, had left. That's all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Well, I don't want to delay the jury. Let me just rule on these motions. So as to the directed motion on the negligence claim, the general negligence claim for the accident itself, the court denies the motion for the reasons that and the evidence that were marshaled by Mr. Bueller. As to the post-accident conduct, it's a little more difficult, and it's also complicated by the fact that there was a negligent infliction of emotional distress claim that was dismissed, and essentially what the plaintiff is claiming is related to the post-accident conduct, is in the nature of emotional distress or emotional or mental suffering, the fright associated with being left alone, and the fright associated with failure to give name and address. Let me just address that part first. So I don't think there's any evidence that the jury could decide that Ms. Paltrow did not give her name and address to an employee of the ski area operator or a member of the ski patrol before leaving the vicinity. She did do that. So I don't believe that she violated any duty that might be imposed by the ordinance, and that's the only place that there's any evidence that requires her to give her name and address at the scene of an accident. And so that post-conduct, I think, is out. As to the duty to render aid, I think that there is an issue of fact, and there is evidence that the jury could decide that the duty to render aid was not followed. And I'm relying on the plaintiff's testimony himself, as well as that of Sam Goldstein and Mr. Ramon. I think that I acknowledge that the testimony on this issue was primarily directed at the Deer Valley employee and the fact that they allegedly abandoned the plaintiff at the scene. But I think that there's enough testimony from both the plaintiff, Mr. Ramon, and then also from Sam Goldstein to also include the defendant herself. And I'm not commenting at all on any of the evidence that the defendants have presented on that issue. I'm only focused on what the plaintiff presented, because I'm required to do that, and I'm also required to grant them any reasonable inferences from that evidence that the jury might be able to make. So that portion of the motion is denied. I guess what that will leave for us is to determine how to read that ordinance in terms of a jury instruction. So we still have that to resolve after we spoke last night. Any questions or clarifications?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, why don't we just take a short break then, and we'll return with the jury. Thank you. Are there any other preliminary issues? Okay. Could you let the lawyers know the jury's on the way? Good morning. We're just waiting on a few more parties, so it'll just be a moment. There was no snow this morning, but I understand we may get some later. So let the record reflect that all parties and counsel are present. The jury is present. And I realize we took a few witnesses out of order, but at this point, does the plaintiff rest its case?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Are you ready to call your next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. We called Dr. Carl Black, our neuroradiology expert.
Thank you. Mr. Black, right up here. Or Dr. Black.
Do you swear that the testimony you are about to give in the case now before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good morning. Come have a seat. Once you get situated, if you could state your full name and spell it.
My name is Carl Milton Black, CarlMiltonBlack.
Thanks for being here with us, Dr. Black. Let's begin by just asking you what your role is in this case.
I was asked to review imaging related to this case between the years of 2009 through 2021.
And what expertise do you have that allows you to opine on imaging of brain scans?
I'm a fellowship-trained neuroradiologist. I also have fellowship training in vascular and interventional radiology, and I'm double board certified by the American Board of Radiology in neuroradiology and vascular and interventional radiology.
Is there anything about that experience and training that is relevant to your opinions in this case?
Yes, I have expertise in analyzing imaging of the brain.
Okay. And let's just go over very quickly the images that you reviewed. Maybe give us the type of image and then the years of those images were taken.
The imaging consisted mainly of CT, Doppler, and MRI. The range of years dated back to imaging performed at the Veterans Administration Hospital in 2009, and then subsequently imaging again at the Veterans Administration in 2016, imaging performed at COG-FX in 2017, and subsequent imaging performed in 2021 at Blue Rock Medical or Riverwoods.
And does that mean that you reviewed imaging both before the ski accident and after the ski accident?
Yes.
And in your review of the imaging, did you see any evidence of traumatic brain injury after the accident?
No.
Did you see any imaging, any evidence in the imaging before the accident that might be consistent with Mr. Sanderson's post-accident symptoms?
Yes.
And we'll talk about the specifics of those. Are you also familiar with Dr. Gibby's opinions in this case? As the jury will recall, Dr. Wendell Gibby is plaintiff's radiology expert. Are you aware of that?
I have reviewed the reports that were provided by Dr. Gibby on imaging that he performed in 2021. I've also reviewed his deposition that he provided to the court.
And so you're familiar with his opinions in this case?
As reflected in his reports and his deposition, yes.
Yeah. In addition to the imaging itself, did you read the reports that were created by the radiologists who took that imaging?
Yes.
And we'll look at those reports in detail. I just want to make it clear that what you've reviewed, you feel like you've reviewed everything you needed to assess this imaging that you've described?
Yes, I've reviewed both the imaging itself and the reports associated with each of those studies.
Okay, so I want to start with an exhibit the plaintiff or the jury has already seen. It's a exhibit to Dr. Gibby's deposition, I believe. You've seen this. I'll show it, and for reference, I know we marked it as one of plaintiff's exhibits, and I'm forgetting the number now. I just had it in my head. Do you guys recall?
Which one?
This one right here. We added it to the end. I apologize. I had it in my mind, and now I've forgotten. Well, while they're looking that up, Dr. Black, have you seen this image before?
I have.
And what is it?
This is a axial image from an MRI performed at COG-FX on October 18th, 2017. Specifically, it's a FLAIR T2 sequence.
And do you understand COG-FX or cognitive FX to be Dr. Fong's clinic?
That's my understanding.
Okay, just to help the jury, they have heard from Dr. Fong. So an MRI was taken at Dr. Fong's clinic. Were those green arrows part of the MRI initially?
No. Those were, I believe, placed by Dr. Gibby during his deposition.
Okay. And what do you understand those to mean? What did Dr. Gibby put those arrows there for?
Those arrows are pointing to what he's terming white matter disease.
And what is white matter disease?
White matter disease reflects scarring in the brain, and often it occurs around the ventricles that you see here. In the deposition, Dr. Gibby's using these arrows to point to areas where he suspected that these may relate to trauma.
I see. And I'm noting that Peter Jensen on my team has just noted that this is Plaintiff Exhibit 31, I believe, for the record. Okay, so those same points that we're looking at with the green arrows, in your understanding of Dr. Gibby's opinions, is he pointing to those as evidence of post-collision problems for Mr. Sanderson?
That's what he indicates in his deposition, yes.
But in your review of the prior imaging, do those same findings show up?
If you review the imaging from 2009, at which time Mr. Sanderson had a comprehensive imaging workup that included imaging of his brain as well as the blood vessels that supply his brain, these findings were present in 2009.
I see. And I believe you've prepared some images that you've taken from the prior to the accident images and post-accident images and noted those. And is that correct?
That's correct.
And we'll show those to the jury in just a second. But what I want to do while we have this one up is give you a pointer and have you point to other findings that you see in this MRI from 2017. Is that okay? Will that help you explain to the jury your opinions about this image?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, I'll bring it to you. May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Okay, Dr. Black. So you've talked about the green arrows. What other findings do you see here?
So one finding that was consistent over.
Can't hear it.
Yeah, should we get him a microphone? Sorry, Dr. Black.
The handheld right there.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Does that work? This study does show imaging that was, or findings that were demonstrated over a decade of imaging, in this case, dating back to 2009. One of them was a mild degree of cortical volume loss or loss of brain volume. The other was in this area here, these are the ventricles, and it showed as disproportionate enlargement of the ventricles relative to the amount of tissue loss in the gray matter and overall brain volume. The findings around the ventricles, these white areas, are very typical of what's called microvascular disease, where brain matter around the ventricles is deprived of oxygen over a long period of time, and that results in gliosis or scarring. This pattern is very typical of what we call microvascular ischemic white matter disease, and that was present in 2009.
And did I hear you correctly earlier? Do you have specialized training in those particular findings beyond what a typical radiologist might have?
My fellowship training and experience in neuroradiology and consistently reading brain MRI gives me expertise in looking at these findings, which we often see on a regular basis.
I see. So this is a post-ski collision image, correct?
This particular sequence is from 2019. My understanding is the accident occurred in 2016.
Yeah, and I think you said 19, but you pointed to 2017.
I'm sorry, 2017. Yes,
Right.
correct.
Yes, and so you said earlier, I believe, that the same findings you're pointing to, again, not just Dr. Gibby's findings with the green arrows, but the other ones you just talked about, they're in the pre-accident images. Is that right?
Yes, my review of the imaging that was done at the Veterans Administration Hospital in 2009 shows these similar findings, and in the reports that were provided by the neuroradiologists who read the imaging at that time, they described these findings.
Right. Okay. So let's maybe have you sit down again, and I'll pull up those slides that you made. Thank you. Thanks. So this is Defendant's Exhibit 101A through, I believe it's A through F. And, Your Honor, I move to admit this as a demonstrative exhibit.
No objection. Defense Exhibit 101A through F is received for demonstrative purposes.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Dr. Black, do you recognize this slide?
Yes, this slide is also what's called a flare sequence, a T2 flare sequence, done in what's called an axial plane, which just means the orientation, the way the image was acquired through the brain. This image was acquired in March of 2009 at the Veterans Administration Hospital.
So that's before the accident, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and again, when I say accident, I mean the ski collision in 2016.
Yes.
And it's not terribly easy to see, but I can call it out here. There's a little arrow. Do you recognize that?
I put that arrow there, yes.
Okay, and what does it point to?
That arrow points to white matter disease, similar to what Dr. Gibby had pointed out in the imaging from 2017.
Right. Okay, so in other words, this is a prior finding that's the same as the post-accident finding Dr. Gibby saw.
Yes, about 8 years earlier.
Okay, got it. And what is this finding associated with?
Again, most commonly we see this with what we term microvascular ischemic white matter disease. There are predisposing risk factors for this, where in some patients it may be accelerated, but it's typically a process that's due to pathology or abnormalities in the very small, some of the smallest blood vessels that supply the brain, particularly around the ventricles.
Then I'll go to the next one, which is 101B, and again, call out a section here at the bottom. There's kind of a faint red arrow. Again, did you put that there?
I did.
Why'd you put that there?
Because it again shows the same pattern of white matter disease that was demonstrated on MRI of 2017.
Okay, so again, a finding before the accident that was there also after the accident.
That's correct.
And what's this finding associated with?
The exact same description.
Got it. Okay, then if we move to 101C, there's yet another red arrow. I take it you put that there.
Yes.
And is it again to point out that Dr. Gibby's finding of post-accident problems in that area preceded the accident?
Yes, accounting for technical differences away in the plane of the way this exam was acquired from 2009 to 2017, these findings are identical.
Right, got it. Okay, and they're also associated with the same things you've described already?
Most likely microvascular disease, and that's when he underwent his comprehensive imaging workup at the VA hospital in 2009. It was also attributed to vascular disease at that time.
Okay, so Defense Exhibit 101D is like your same version of that 2017 image that Dr. Gibby looked at.
Correct.
And it has those same spots. So I'll just use the laser here. Again, these arrows are kind of faint on my copy. I apologize, but they're pointing to those same points we've just looked at previously. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then if we go to the next image, this is a new image we haven't looked at, correct?
Correct.
And this one's from 2021, as it's marked. Where was this image taken? Do you recall?
Yes, this image was obtained at Blue Rock Medical or Riverwoods Imaging, which Dr. Gibby owns, and this is the same sequence that we've shown before as far as how it is technically obtained by MRI. Same slice.
Got it. And again, we have some arrows, correct?
Correct.
And those are your arrows?
Yes.
And they're showing, I take it, the same disease process or same findings that you've seen in the 2009 and then 2017 images.
That's correct.
So you're seeing this same condition in the brain for many years, both before the accident and after it.
Over an 11-year period, a similar pattern of white matter disease, yes.
And then if we go to the next image, 101F, we call out that upper left quadrant arrow, and again, I believe you put that there, correct?
Yes.
And kind of for the same reasons, to show these conditions persist from 2009 before the accident to this image in 2021.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And let's see. So
I'm giving the jury 101G. That was referenced, was it not?
that would be the next one,
Okay.
which I haven't referenced, but if there's no objection, that's just the next bit of the slides.
No objection.
Okay.
What is that?
Could we see it though?
Can you move that? Steve?
But just let us see it before you.
Sure.
Yeah, it's near hard to find here. I think.
Is that 101F?
So this is 101F on the screen, and then what Steve has put here is 101G.
Correct.
Right.
Defense Exhibit 101G, is that also for demonstrative purposes?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Received for demonstrative purposes?
Okay, so Dr. Black, you've used various medical terminology that we might not all be familiar with, microvascular disease, for example. Can you give us a sense of what, in lay person's terms, what these sorts of findings are correlated with, how they impact a person?
Sure. The microvascular disease itself is a term that's used to describe micro, just meaning very small, and then vascular, the blood vessels, that when these blood vessels over time become diseased, which happens in a broad section of the population, in some people it's accelerated due to underlying high blood pressure or perhaps other diseases of the blood vessels, then you start to see scarring initially around the ventricles. These are unlike large strokes that may affect the cortex of the brain. These are smaller areas where the blood vessels are compromised, and it results in scarring of the tissue around the ventricles, and that's why we call it white matter disease. The other imaging in 2009 from the Veterans Administration, the CT angio, specifically looked at the larger blood vessels that supplied Mr. Sanderson's brain, and in those images they found plaque or hardening of the arteries in the carotid bifurcation on his right side, and then also in the larger blood vessels inside of his brain near where his retinal arteries come off, or the cavernous carotid arteries, and those also show plaque or atherosclerosis.
Okay, is it too reductive to say that these findings are an indication of an aging brain?
Well, aging can result in this because we're all deteriorating to some degree or other every day we live.
Right.
But because we have a baseline, you can attribute certain findings. If it's happening at an accelerated level, given someone's age, then it might indicate there's underlying medical problems. The other finding that was present that was consistently present was the enlargement of the ventricles, which on all images seemed to be disproportionate or out of the proportion to the amount of atrophy of the brain. In several reports, there was a suggestion of a diagnosis of normal pressure hydrocephalus, and in fact, if you go to the image, let's see, that maybe the 2021. We don't have it on here. There's an image he showed that shows what's called transependymal edema, and that's fluid that leaks through the side of the ventricle due to pressure buildup in the ventricle, and that's a supporting finding from an imaging perspective of normal pressure hydrocephalus. Obviously, that has to be correlated to someone's clinical presentation and symptoms, and that's where a neurologist would play an important role in that.
I see. And I think the jury has heard about this term multiple times, but let's spend just a moment from your perspective defining what normal pressure hydrocephalus is.
Normal pressure hydrocephalus is basically an imbalance of the way fluid's managed within the ventricular system of the brain, and it can result in confusion or unsteadiness of gait when it's clinically applicable. But from an imaging perspective, that diagnosis is suggested when the ventricles seem to be disproportionately enlarged relative to the brain volume itself.
So from an imaging perspective, there was strong indication that Mr. Sanderson had normal pressure hydrocephalus.
It was suggested in every brain study he's had since 2009.
And is it a progressive condition? In other words, does it get worse with time?
Yes, it can.
And then I'm going to go to another image another report, a document that the jury has already seen. This one we looked at with Dr. Gibby. This is his report from March 3rd, 2021. Do you remember seeing this?
Yes, I reviewed this.
Okay. I believe it's also part of Gibby's packet in Plaintiff's Exhibit 31. What I want to point out, I think I called this out with Dr. Gibby. I want you to comment on it. There's a part of this report that says, I don't see any sign of shearing injury. Do you see that?
I see his report, yes.
And do you agree with that?
I agree with this report, yes.
Okay. And what do you understand Dr. Gibby's opinions to be as shearing injury is concerned?
So this report was performed on March 3rd, 2021, specifically looking for evidence of brain trauma. So that was the clinical history provided to Dr. Gibby, and he was looking in detail for any imaging findings that would support closed head injury.
And would shearing injury be one of those?
Yeah, the things that Dr. Gibby would have been looking for, or that any of us would look for when we're evaluating a study in a patient with brain injury, would be shearing of the white matter tracts. These are very delicate, where if there's a rapid deceleration of the brain, those can shear. When they do shear, they deposit little microhemorrhages that leave blood products in the brain, specifically iron that's found in hemoglobin. So in another sequence, Dr. Gibby would have been looking for any evidence of iron deposition, which he mentions here, pathologic iron deposition. And then the other thing you would look for is bruising of the cortex of the brain. The brain does move to some degree with inside the skull because of it's bathed in cerebrospinal fluid. So if there's a rapid deceleration, the brain cortex can hit up against the skull and cause a bruise. In some cases, it can result in hemorrhage, but in other cases, it can result in focal atrophy at those locations. So in this case, none of the imaging showed a contusion, no shear injury, and no evidence of pathologic hemorrhage in the brain.
What would you expect to see in a person's imaging after some kind of traumatic brain injury?
Well, it depends on the severity, of course.
Right.
In mild trauma, nothing.
Okay. And how would you describe Dr. Gibby's opinions about the evidence of trauma in his Mr. Sanderson's post-collision imaging?
In Dr. Gibby's report, where he specifically was looking for evidence of trauma, he emphatically states there is no evidence of post-traumatic brain injury in his report. Now, it is interesting because it contradicts to some degree his description in his deposition.
And how does it contradict that?
Well, Dr. Gibby mentions that in his deposition that the white matter disease that we've reviewed is very typical of shear injury or pathologic brain injury. But yet in his own report of the imaging which was performed at his center, which is identical to the findings in 2017 where he was offering that opinion in his deposition, he emphatically states that there is no evidence of post-traumatic brain injury.
Objection. The state's prior testimony.
Overruled, the jury will have to recall the testimony.
Dr. Black, do you see on this report any indication that this image was compared to prior images?
No,
Is that common to do when you do a report, you compare it to prior images?
there were 3 imaging studies done after the accident. One was a CT scan done again at the Veterans Administration in 2016, which was compared to 2009. The imaging that was performed in 2017 and 2021 make no reference of comparison dating back to 2009. So I presume those images were not available to them.
Is that a problem? Does that lead to any limitations of a study if you don't look back at the prior studies?
It does limit the way that a neuroradiologist can interpret an image. If you have prior imaging, it helps put things into context and can narrow the differential or the possibilities in terms of the diagnosis. For example, in this case, knowing that the white matter disease pre-existed in 2009 is helpful to exclude that it's a result of shear injury is of extreme importance.
So are you critical of Dr. Gibby for not doing that comparison?
Not necessarily critical. Those images just may not have been available to him. I think if you offer an opinion as to causality and you do have imaging that's available from the Veterans Administration and someone draws a conclusion without baseline imaging taken into account, that can alter someone's conclusion and lead to an error in how they're discussing why that abnormality exists.
And do you believe that sort of error occurred here with Dr. Gibby's opinion?
I do. I think he was limited by the unavailability or lack of comparison to the imaging that was done in 2009. Yes.
Okay, I want to move to another report. This is for that 2017 image we started with, the one with the green arrows that was taken at Dr. Fong's clinic. It's in Plaintiff's Exhibit 33, page 8. I don't know that we've shown it, so I'd move to admit it.
Plaintiff's exhibit which?
It's Plaintiff's Exhibit 33, page 8, and I guess 8 and 9. There's 2 pages. Just the report.
Just the imaging or the report? Which one?
Which one of the plaintiffs or?
Exhibit 33, Fong's packet, pages 8
Well, all of us are
and 9.
admitted, aren't they?
All of us are.
Oh, we did already admit it. Okay, great. I just know we didn't admit some of it. Yep.
Is 33 received?
That was
33 was not received.
Seems like no objection. May I publish it to the jury, Your Honor?
No objection.
Plaintiff's Exhibit 33, page 8 is received.
And James, do you want it from start to end, or was there just one?
No, just 2 pages, page 8 and page 9.
Page 8 and page 9 are received.
Yeah, this is, again, the report connected to the image that we looked at first, taken at Dr. Fong's clinic in 2017. Is that correct, Dr. Black?
That's correct.
And I want to point to, I guess we should first ask the question we were just asking about Dr. Gibby. Do you see any comparison here?
No.
Okay, so the same points you made about the limitations of Dr. Gibby's report, you would say about this report, is that right?
Correct.
And if we call out this bottom part that's called impressions, I'd like for you to comment on whether you agree with these.
I do agree with these impressions.
And will you take us through them in layperson's terminology? Maybe we could start. We've covered some parts of the ventricles. You feel like you've explained that?
Well, I think we can. Let me just emphasize one other aspect of
Go ahead.
the ventricles. Also, I think it's important to note that the context of this study being acquired was specifically with the intent to look for any evidence of closed head injury or significant brain trauma. And so there are pertinent negatives that are pointed out by the radiologist who interpreted this exam that did not exist, like hemorrhage in the brain or evidence of a contusion. So there are pertinent negatives, even with the strong bias of looking for those because of the history.
So just to make sure I'm understanding you, that when you talk about bias, you're just saying going into this image, they heard a history of traumatic brain injury, concussion, so they're apprised of the possibility of various findings that might be associated with that, and they want to find them. They're looking
Correct.
for them.
That's correct.
Foundation.
Sustained for leading.
So maybe just comment on bias again, because that term is used in various ways. What do you mean when you talk about bias in these?
When I'm referring to bias, I'm talking professionally. When we interpret an exam, the clinical context of that exam or why that exam is being obtained is important to us. If somebody has an infection or if somebody has a brain tumor, then we understand that and we're looking for various findings that would support that. In this case, if somebody has known trauma, then that would alert the radiologist to look for certain findings. So in the case of the MRI performed in 2017 and the one performed in 2021, there would be an alert to look for findings related to trauma. So the negatives, the pertinent negatives in the exam from 2017, just like the one that was performed in 2021, would rule out imaging evidence of significant head trauma.
Yeah. So in other words, they're looking for trauma, but they did not find it. Is that
Yes.
right? Okay. So let's go to these findings again. Here in number 2, there's normal pressure hydrocephalus. We've talked about that, but there are a couple other things: normal aging brain, Alzheimer's dementia, subcortical arteriosclerotic encephalopathy, multi-infarct dementia. Did I read all that correctly?
You did.
And those are some big words. Can you comment on those to help the jury understand what these are doing in this report?
Well, some of these are clinical descriptors, which would require a neurologist to make a correlation by examining that patient, because imaging can show a lot of things that don't necessarily manifest in someone clinically. So it's important to always take it into clinical context. The one description here that actually reflects underlying pathology would be the arteriosclerotic encephalopathy. That's just a big word for diseases of the blood vessels, specifically plaque or hardening of the arteries. The comprehensive workup that was done at the Veterans Administration in 2009 did show evidence of vascular disease at that time in the carotid arteries, in the neck, and also in the brain. And at that time, the white matter disease, which again was present over a decade later, was attributed to vascular disease.
Did you see any evidence in the imaging that correlates with vision problems?
No. There was mention of it with the functional MRI, but that is beyond my expertise.
Okay, you'd leave that to a neurologist to speak to, somebody else?
Somebody has who expertise in functional imaging.
Okay. Okay, so we can take this down, I think. Did you note anything in the, well, let me ask first, are you aware that Dr. Gibby actually met with Mr. Sanderson?
I'm aware of that.
And is there anything about that meeting that has any bearing on your opinions today?
The only bearing it would have is that Dr. Gibby makes mention in his report that he had told Mr. Sanderson that it's possible you could go through all of this workup and not find any evidence of post-traumatic brain injury.
And why would that be significant to you?
Simply because obviously the intent of that workup was to specifically look for evidence of brain injury.
I believe the jury's heard Dr. Gibby give an opinion that I want to see if you remember and what your comment might be, your response to it might be. If the images prior to the accident are similar to the post-accident imaging, in other words, if the imaging prior showed things that were post-accident, would that mean that you cannot say the prior findings were caused by the accident?
Objection leading Ms. State's prior testimony.
As to leading sustained?
Okay, so do you recall Dr. Gibby giving an opinion that if the pre-accident findings the post-accident findings are found in the pre-accident imaging, that you could not say that the post-accident imaging was caused by the accident?
Objection leading
Sustained?
Okay. What do you recall Dr. Gibby saying about the relationship between the pre-accident imaging and the post-accident imaging?
My opinion on that would be based on his deposition. If you'd like, I can read 2 areas of his deposition that I think answer your question.
Sure, go ahead.
So,
objection you're saying.
Sustained?
Okay, so let's just ask you this question. Do you have any opinions about whether the post-accident imaging findings can be attributed to, from an imaging perspective, the collision, the ski collision?
Objection leading.
Overruled?
we ask that again.
Yes. Do you have any opinions about whether the post-accident imaging findings can be attributed to the collision?
Yes.
What is that opinion?
That those findings predate the accident and date back to at least 2009, as confirmed by a comprehensive imaging workup of Mr. Sanderson's brain performed at the Veterans Administration Hospital.
And so do you believe those post-accident, I apologize that I keep messing this up. Do you believe that those post-accident imaging findings are in any way related to the collision?
No.
And what was the reason for that 2009 workup, to your knowledge?
Unfortunately, Mr. Sanderson had suffered a retinal artery occlusion, a central retinal artery occlusion that resulted in blindness in one eye, and so he was undergoing a workup for risk factors that would relate to that.
Okay. And do you know any of the people that have done any of his imaging?
I'm familiar with him, yes.
Yeah, and so that 2009 workup, or do you know the people that did that workup?
Yes.
And do you trust the findings that they came to?
Yeah, they're very experienced and well-trained, yes.
Okay, great. That's all the questions I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Egan. Mr. Bueller?
I'm going to start at the end. You're not an eye doctor, are you?
I'm not.
And you said the imaging.
That's delivering on our commitment and demonstrating the power of democracy. Angola is taking steps to build an independent judiciary, creating three new regional courts of appeal, which are going to help process cases more quickly. The Dominican Republic has modernized its anti-corruption law to create more than 100 anti-corruption offices at local levels. Croatia is implementing a multi-year anti-corruption plan to increase government transparency and better oversee public procurement. And there are many more examples I could give, but I'm not going to take the time. In many other countries, for every person from countries taking the first steps toward reform to well-established democracies, of people making real changes to protect and strengthen their democracy. Look, all we know, it's not...
All right, we've been listening and watching there as President Biden delivers remarks at the White House for what is the second Summit for Democracy. He was addressing leaders from around the world there at that virtual event. I'm Errol Barnett.
And I'm Lana Zach. We're going to take a quick break. We'll continue to monitor that and bring you any headlines. And we'll also have the rest of the day's news, including the latest on the investigation into that deadly Nashville school shooting. That will all be at the top of the hour, so stay with us. You're streaming CBS News.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
The first U2 show really was on this outside here.
Oh, right there.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Nora O'Donnell, and we go person to person with Bono.
Community is at the very heart of U2's music. There was magic, that's all we had.
Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
If it's important to our nation.
Madam Speaker, I want to talk to you, of course, about abortion.
It's on Face the Nation.
How much money is it that you think you need to go ask Congress for?
The why behind the biggest stories.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS. An original documentary from CBS reports. As the nation of Hungary evolves toward autocracy.
If you define an autocrat as someone that the people can no longer get rid of, even when there are elections, he's definitely an autocrat.
Some American conservatives like what they see.
Viktor Orban has done a tremendous job, and you've kept your country safe.
CBS Reports explores their growing alliance.
I have come to Texas. We should unite our forces.
So there are a ton of booths here, a lot of young people here.
And what it means for American democracy.
Prime Minister Orban is being accused of all kinds of things simply because he doesn't toe that liberal line. He stands for Christian conservative values.
To sum up, the mother is a woman, the father is a man, and leave our kids alone. Full stop, end of discussion.
A new conservative alliance, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme.
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bringing virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battery lamps.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
We're really excited that we've been honored with the Emmy Award for Outstanding Live News Program. But we know we couldn't have done that without you. So thank you. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7 on CBS.
The news doesn't have to always be depressing.
What do you love about running?
It can be uplifting. That human connection that we create on the broadcast every night is incredibly important.
My name is Nora. How are you doing?
We go to stories. We travel there because we can bring someone to that story.
You have spinal issues and you can hit the ball that far.
It feels so good.
That's so incredible.
Tell me, what do you love about running?
The news doesn't have to always be depressing. It can be uplifting. That human connection that we create on the broadcast every night is incredibly important.
The workplace has shifted after 3 years of COVID. What it means for your pursuit of happiness. Join me on Primetime.
Stream on the free CBS News app.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
While working from home, employees may not have as much privacy as they would like. According to a recent study from Resume Builder, 37% of employers require workers to appear in a live video feed, while 62% of employees track their workers through their web activity. The study also found that 70% of companies say that their workers have quit because of these concerns. Most businesses have used this monitoring data to fire employees. That'll do it here for now. I'll see you again tomorrow at 7 Eastern for CBS News Mornings. Our colleagues Lana Zach and Errol Barnett take over after a short break.
New Jersey's Attorney General has taken over a local police department after officers shot and killed a black man during a mental health crisis. We'll talk to a legal expert about what this major move means and the department's history of other incidents. Keep it right here. You're streaming CBS News.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
it's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are. Technology is baked into the DNA of our generation.
Now streaming Chasing Fame.
I like being famous. I would love for my career to launch.
Is the hunt for social media popularity an opportunity?
To get verified is one of my big goals. If I get the blue check mark, it would open a lot of doors.
Or an obsession?
I spend a lot of time looking in the mirror because I want to look perfect.
Are the kids all right? Chasing Fame. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm here.
Fire and rescue is out. They're doing wellness checks when people are trapped inside their homes. How's the pay?
A lot better.
That's you and the Queen. That's beautiful.
Mr. Sanderson, my area of expertise is in brain imaging.
Do you typically evaluate patients when you read their imaging?
With regard to brain imaging, no.
And then after, let's see, I guess we did show one of these boards, but you didn't get to see it. I want to make sure you see it so that the jury knows that you've seen it. And I'll show you. This is 101G, and these are the same. Are these the same images we were looking at on the screen?
Yes.
And they show that before there was a finding that was also after the collision. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so I think the jury's already seen this. And then we also have two more boards which we didn't show. Your Honor, I move to admit 101H and 101I for demonstrative purposes.
No objection. Defense Exhibit 101H and 101I, or is this plaintiff's exhibits?
These are ours, yes.
So your defense exhibits are received for demonstrative purposes?
So I'll show you first, Dr. Black. Is this the same idea as the board we just saw?
Yes.
Okay, just with different findings?
Yes.
Okay, and then that was 101H.
Objection beyond the scope. Overruled.
And then this is 101I. And
yes.
Same idea?
Yes.
Okay, so we just show the jury 101H, 101I. And then my last question for you, Dr. Black, is whether after questioning from Mr. Bueller, you have your opinions about these objective findings you've been discussing on the imaging changed?
They have not.
Okay, thank you.
So earlier you said you preferred to have objective findings from a neurologist or neuropsychologist, correct?
For clinical correlation, absolutely.
Yeah, for clinical correlation. Would you defer to someone like Dr. Goldstein?
I don't know him, so that name doesn't mean anything to me.
He's a neuropsychologist who testified in this trial. You didn't know that?
No.
So Dr. Goldstein provided clinical correlation, and that would help your opinions if you had that, true?
Sure. If somebody has expertise clinically that I don't have, but it doesn't change how I interpret the images or my view of these findings.
So your opinions are limited to your view of the images and not the clinical findings, true?
Correct.
Thank you.
You bet.
Mr. Egan?
That's all, Your Honor.
You may be excused. Thank you.
Call our next witness or take a brief break.
Is this witness going to take a bit?
Robert Hesch, sorry, and I would think I could be on and off in a half hour, I think.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead and take a break because there will be cross-examination, I'm sure. We'll take a recess now.